Hello and welcome back to the Hornby magazine workshop for our video sound installation guide for the Hornby Merchant Navy 462. We're focused on the air smooth original condition locomotives, and today's subject is 35024 East Asiatic Company in the striking BR line blue livery. Now there's a number of ways you can go about a sound installation for these locomotives, and in the past in the Hornby magazine yearbook we have covered a very comprehensive and detailed way to do that. As well as adding sound and a speaker into the tender, we also added firebox flicker and cab interior lighting too. However, this method, which I've used on another of my locomotives before, shows a much simpler and quicker way to do it. All the work is confined to the tender, where we're going to install the speaker and the decoder and a stay alive as well. Right, on with the show. Let's take the 35024 apart and get on with the process. So the starting point for any sound installation on a steam locomotive, particularly a tender locomotive, is going to be separating the two halves of the model. So to do this, I'm going to use a Hornby X6468 pin extractor, which extracts the plug that joins the locomotive and tender together. I'll use a slotted screwdriver to undo the screws between the two pieces. So now that the locomotive and tender are separated, I can literally move them apart from each other. I can put the locomotive to one side because we're not going to be touching that at all now. And I'll put the screw that holds the two together safely with the locomotive as well. So next we can remove the two screws that hold the tender body in place. They're located either side of the tender coupling at the back here. They're quite deeply recessed, and you can use either a crosshead or a suitable flat blade screwdriver. Tap both those out, put the screws safely to one side. Now the tender body will lift up from the chassis, giving us full access to the interior. Now, as designed, there's not a huge amount of space available for a different type of speaker in here. It's been designed to suit a 28mm round speaker, which would fit underneath the tender weight here, allowing you to plug the decoder in on top and lay the decoder on top of the speaker there. But I want to use a slightly bigger speaker, so I'm going to be using this 40x20 rare exclusive twin speaker. So in order to do that, I've got to modify the tender interior by removing the metal weight, and then I'll reposition all the components inside to suit. We'll keep the original decoder socket, but we'll adjust its position so that we don't have to cut away any of the plastic inside. So that's my aim, is to use all this space here that's available inside the tender, but without having to cut away the coal space. Okay, so next we're going to remove the metal weight from the tender, but to do that, first I've got to take out the decoder socket here. So just in doing the two crosshead screws, one either side of the 8-pin socket. Put them to one side, we might need them later. Releases the 8-pin socket. Then the same process to remove the metal weight. So undoing the 3 screws that hold that in place. Carefully feed the decoder socket through. Now these metal weights, I always keep them for future use. I might need them to weight another wagon, or I can chop bits off them to weight different vehicles. So I always keep one of those spare in my spares box. And similarly the screws as well. You'll be surprised how many uses you can find for spare screws with a model railway. Right, so now we've got our empty space here. Now there's a couple of other things I might need to look at with this. I might need to cut down these 3 supporting pins for the metal weight in order to fit the speaker in, but we're going to have a test run first so we can fit everything in without making any further modifications. I think it's most likely I will have to make a modification, like I say, to cut those down, but let's see what we can do first. So this might look a little bit brutal, but what we're going to do is we're going to cut these 2 plastic supporting lugs off here. Definitely not the back ones because they hold the tender body in place. I'm just going to use a pair of side cutters to do the job because it'll make it nice and quick and simple. just like that. Right, so I'm now already ready to start repositioning components inside the tender. Now, you will notice when you take this modification route and remove the tender weight that your tender feels a lot lighter. We are going to put a bit of weight back in with the speaker and the decoder and the stay alive in there. But again, in practice, when I've done this before with another locomotive, I've never found taking the tender weight out to be too much of a problem for a locomotive that's generally hauling a train. If you did have a worry about that, you could add some liquid lead from the likes of Deluxe Materials and fill all the channels in the bottom of the tender here to add a bit of more weight into the bottom of the tender there as well. I'm not going to do that here. I've missed it out on a few projects before. It's never caused me any problems. But like I say, if you did want to do that and add a bit of weight in, you can take that route as well. So I'm now going to start positioning the components inside the tender. And to do so, I'm going to be using black tack, which is like a high strength version of blue tack. It's flexible, which means you can take components on and off as well, which means you can add it in and then take it apart if you need to do later as well. And it's just a very simple and quick means of getting parts fitted inside a tender like this. So I'm going to start with the speaker first. That's going to be the first part we put into the locomotive tender here. Put some black tack into the chassis. Screw the speaker down into place. Now I've got a basic hold on it there. Got a little bit more to hold it in place securely as well. So next I'm going to use the same medium to hold the decoder socket back in place, because we're going to position the decoder socket up at the front of the tender chassis here instead. What it means is we're going to have space for the decoder to plug in on top of there, then we can rest the decoder in top of the tender above the speaker here as well. So it'll be nice and out of the way once it's inside the locomotive. Now you might have noticed that I've offset the position of the speaker, so it's sat sort of 2/3 to one side of the locomotive tender, and that's because I want to have space for a stay alive to sit along this side of the tender here. So I use this black tack here to fix that in place alongside the speaker. It means we can keep all the components nice and neat inside the tender. So the stay alive we're using for this guide is a Digitrain's 86009 type, which has got 4 capacitors built in. It's also got a stay alive charge circuit built in there as well, so you can use it with different decoder types. The Zimo MX645 decoder we use in this, it manages the stay alive power anyway, so you haven't got anything to worry about. And this is where the flexibility of black tack comes in really handy now, because if I've not quite got those two components in exactly the right place inside the tender, I can just manoeuvre them across a little bit inside the tender body as I put the body back on, and it won't be any problem. Whereas if I'd use something like super glue to hold them in place, I would be really stuck fast with the position they're in. So next to be installed inside the locomotive tender is going to be this MX645 Zimo decoder. So this is an 8-pin type, which plugs straight into the 8-pin socket we've got here. And I'm going to be positioning it, so it's actually going to be fixed to the roof of the tender inside here. So we won't be touching the speaker, it'll actually be attached to the roof inside the tender here like this. We can then connect all the components to that, and our locomotive will be ready to run. So next I'm going to start joining things together to the decoder. So first I'm going to join the stay alive to the MX645 decoder. Now this has a grey and a blue wire on their own coming out of one end of the chip, and that's where the stay alive connection is. So we're going to use these. Now you'll notice that the stay alive we've got has actually got a black and a blue wire. Now handily, the blue wire is always the same on all decoder types and all stay alives. So connect the blue to the blue and the black to the grey, and that'll give our stay alive the right connections. Now I'm just going to shorten some of these wires as well, because we don't need the full length. I prefer using these small scissors to shorten wire lengths, because I find them a lot neater than wire cutters. And take about half a length off each of the wires. Less wire to install means it's less things to fit inside the tender. Then I'm using a pair of DCC Concepts wire strippers to bare the ends of the wires. I set them at the right size to suit the wire that I'm using, so we don't cut too deep and chop the wire. Another very important part of any sound installation is to make sure you insulate any joints inside the tender or body of a locomotive. We don't want wires coming into contact with each other, so I'm using some heat shrink insulation. Just slide that over the end of one side of the wire on these stay alive connections. Then I'm going to simply twist the matching colour wires together. Then, using my preheated soldering iron and some suitable solder, solder those two bare wire ends together so they have a permanent joint. So again, this is where my small scissors come into their own, is I can now shorten these wires a little bit. It's much easier to do with these scissors than it is with a pair of wire cutters. After that, I'm going to slide the heat shrink insulation over the bare wire. Then using the side of my soldering iron, I'm just going to carefully shrink that heat shrink. Until it wraps neatly around the wire join. We're going to move on now to connect the decoder to the speaker using the purple wires from the decoder and the purple wires from the speaker. Now, there's two ways we can go about doing this. We can do the same method we use for the Stay Alive, so shorting the wires on both and then using heat shrink insulation to cover the join. Or we could just remove the speaker wires completely from the speaker and solder the wires from the decoder direct onto the speaker. That's going to save us a little bit of space inside the locomotive, so that's probably the method I'm going to use here. So again, I'm going to use my trusty small scissors, and they're going to neatly snip off these wires on the speaker. Save them for later as well, might need them for something else. And then, like we did with the Stay Alive wires, I'm going to shorten these two purple speaker wires as well. I'm going to take about 40% of the length of those. Like I said before, it's just about reducing the amount of bulk that's got to fit inside the tender. Bare the ends again, like we did with the Stay Alive wires. So next we're going to use a process called tinning, which is where we cover the bare ends of these wires with solder. And what that means is it makes it simpler to join the wires to the speaker, because there's already solder then on the wire ends and there's already solder on the speaker as well. So all you're then doing is heating the solder together on those two components rather than having to heat the wire, the solder and the component all at the same time. It's very simply just heat up a small amount of solder on the soldering iron, let it run onto the bare wire. Another advantage of doing this as well is we can control how long that piece of wire that's bare is going to be now as well, because actually that length it is now, it's probably about 2 times too long for what we actually need it to be. But it's much easier to do this after you've bared the ends than it is to do it when you're stripping the wire. Now we can solder the speaker wires from the decoder onto the speaker itself, and like I said, it should be nice and easy because we've already got solder on the wire end and solder on the speaker here. Okay, very short, probably 1 or 2 seconds of contact between the wire and the speaker wire. That's it, speaker connected. So what we need to do now is work out where pin 1 is on the socket. And I'm just going to turn this round because it'll be simpler for you to see then as well. So pin 1 is marked on the socket by this little arrow at the top. And pin 1 on an 8-pin plug is marked by the arrival of the orange wire. So you can see the orange wire comes to the pin here at the top. So this is pin 1. So that makes it nice and easy to make sure we've got the decoder being plugged in the right way around. So everything inside the tender is now connected and we're ready to refit the body. Now, I'm quite confident this is all going to work first time, so I'm not going to test this before I put the locomotive's tender body back on. But if you wanted to test it, you could rejoin the locomotive, plug in its 4-pin plug, put the screw back in that holds the drawbar in place, and give it a quick test before you put the body back on. For me though, I'm just going to put this locomotive back together now, get it all joined up, and then we can see how it works at the end. So 21 function keys available on this sound profile for the Zimmo sound decoder, which was originally recorded by Locoman Sounds and now available through Digitrains. Function 0 would turn the lamps on and off if they were fitted to the locomotive. Function 1 turns the main sounds on, usually the boiler hiss and general operating sounds for the locomotive. Function 2 is an active brake key, which actively operates the brakes and also makes the braking sound when pressed. Function 3 is a whistle. Function 4 is a right-away whistle. Function 5 selects between a heavy train and light engine sound set, so that changes how the locomotive responds to throttle inputs. Function 6 is coal shoveling sounds. Function 7 is the live steam injector. Function 8 plays a wheel slip sound. Function 9 is the sound of the cab door opening or closing. Function 10 is a long whistle. Function 11 is the firebox opening and closing. Function 12 is tender water filling. Function 13 is a coupling sound. Function 14 is the safety valves. Function 15 is the cylinder drain cocks. Function 16 is a guard's whistle. Function 17 is a long whistle with echo. Function 19 fades all sounds when turned on. We'll fade them back in when you turn it back off again. And finally, we can control the volume live through functions. So function 27 will turn the overall sound volume down, while function 28 will turn the overall sound volume up. So that brings us to the end of our sound installation guide for the Hornby Merchant Navy 462 as part of Bullied Week here on KeyModelWorld.com. And the sound file we've used is a Digitrain sound file, which was originally engineered by Low Command Sounds. It's got some great functionality in it, as you've heard in our sound demonstration here. I hope you enjoyed this video. As for our model, there's more for that in the future. It's due to go for some weathering and a crew and also a coal load as well. And hopefully it'll be fit and ready for the next time we take 12 Trees Junction out to Model Railway Exhibition. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.